The farmhouse wasn't supposed to be mine. I found it by accident 3 years ago, driving back roads after a job site ran long, and there it was at the end of a gravel lane. 2 stories of weathered siding, a collapsed porch on one corner, boards across 2 of the downstairs windows, and a for sale sign that looked like it had been through 4 winters without anyone caring enough to replace it. I pulled over. I sat in my truck for a few minutes just looking at it. Then I called the number on the sign. The price was low enough to make me suspicious. I asked why. The agent told me it had been sitting empty for 6 years, after the previous owner passed, and the estate couldn't agree on what to do with it. Nobody wanted to sell it. Nobody wanted to maintain it. 6 years of nobody making a decision. And now here I was, 30 years old, $1,200 in my checking account beyond my emergency fund, asking about a property with a lake view and a collapsed porch. I made an offer that weekend. They accepted by Tuesday. By the following month, I had a deed and a house that needed everything. I'm a contractor. I build and renovate for a living. So I knew what I was signing up for, or I thought I did. What I didn't account for was the way a project like that becomes personal, in ways that a job site never does. On a job you clock out, you go home. The thing you're building belongs to someone else. But at the farmhouse, on Friday nights, when I drove the 2 hours out from the city and unlocked that door and stepped into walls that were still raw drywall and subfloor, I was building something that was going to be mine. Every decision I made, where the bathroom tiles would go, how wide the kitchen counters would be, whether to keep the original hardwood under the linoleum or pull it up and start fresh, was a decision I had to live with. That's a different weight. It took 2 years of weekends to make it livable. 2 more seasons after that, to make it what I actually wanted it to be. I pulled the old wiring and ran new. I redid the plumbing myself and put in a proper system for the well. I framed out a screened porch where the collapsed one had been, rebuilt it with pressure-treated lumber, stained the boards by hand. I built a dock at the water's edge. I planted things. I learned what the land needed the way you learn a person, over time, by paying attention. When I finally sat on that dock, on a Thursday evening in early September, my boots off, a beer in my hand, watching the sun go down behind the tree line across the lake, I felt something I didn't have a precise word for. Not pride exactly, more like arrival, like I'd been moving towards something for a long time. And I had finally gotten there. That was 8 months before my sister texted. She texted, actually. Laurel had a habit of texting things she didn't want to negotiate, and I recognized the move the moment I read it. The message came through on a Wednesday evening while I was eating dinner at my kitchen table in the city apartment. I kept for work weeks. I read it once, then set down my fork and read it again. Hey, so Burke's family is doing a big reunion this summer, and they need space. I told them about the farmhouse. We're thinking 2 weeks in July, probably starting around the 11th. It would be his parents and his brother and sister with their families. So maybe 15 people? Probably 2 dogs. Just let me know what you need from us for the keys. I sat there for a while. There was no would that be okay? There was no. I know it's a big ask. There was just the announcement of what was already decided, and then a question about logistics. She hadn't asked me. She'd already told someone else. 15 people, apparently, including people who had apparently started making plans. And now she was informing me and asking me to cooperate with what she'd promised. I called her. Did you get my text? She said, before I could get a word in. I did, I said. Burke's mom is really excited. She said the lake pictures you posted were gorgeous. Oh, is it okay if they bring dogs? I think both families have dogs. Laurel, I said, you didn't ask me. A pause. I'm asking now. You told Burke's family before you talked to me. I mean, she shifted into the tone she used when she was treating my concerns as technical objections to something she'd already decided was fine. I figured you'd be okay with it. You're not usually out there in July. That wasn't accurate, but it also wasn't the point. It's still my house, I said, whether I'm there or not. Nobody's saying it isn't. The edge in her voice was subtle but present. We just thought it'd be a good fit. They don't have access to anything like what you have. And you have all that space. I waited, trying to figure out whether this was a real conversation or a formality. Whether she was checking in or going through a motion she felt she had to complete before proceeding with plans that were already made. Can we finalize the dates this week? She said. Burke wants to get everyone coordinated. I'll think about it, I said. Okay, but don't wait too long. These things take planning. Then, lighter, you're not going to be weird about this, are you? I told her I had to go. I got off the phone. I finished my dinner without tasting it, then sat at the table for a long time after. The thing about Laurel is that I love her. She's my sister, and she's been good to me in ways that matter. She drove 6 hours to help me when my appendix ruptured the year after college. She called me every week for 2 months after I went through a bad breakup and didn't make me feel pathetic for needing it. There are years of history between us that aren't reducible to one text message and a tone of voice. But she'd gotten into a pattern with her husband, and the pattern was this. He decided things. She agreed, and then whatever was decided became reality that other people were expected to accommodate. It had started small. Dinner plans rearranged, holidays restructured, commitments made on behalf of others without asking. And each time, because it wasn't worth the fight, people adjusted, including me, including our parents, including anyone who loved Laurel and didn't want to make her life harder by pushing back on her husband's habits. I had let it build up for a while. This was just the first time it had landed on my doorstep, in a way I couldn't step around. By Friday evening, I had made my decision. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I drove out to the farmhouse on Saturday, which was normal. I spent the day doing things around the property, the way I usually did, but Sunday morning, early, I sat down at the utility closet off the kitchen. The one I'd framed in myself, barely bigger than a broom closet, and opened the control panel I'd mounted there years ago. The house runs on a private well, out on that lake road. There's no municipal water connection. I'd installed a smart controller for the pump when I redid the plumbing, the kind that lets you monitor pressure remotely, set schedules, restrict access. At the time I'd done it, because I was out there alone, and I wanted to be able to check on the system from the city if something went wrong over winter. Practical choice. I'd set it with a 4-digit code and hadn't told anyone about it because there'd been no reason to. I changed the code that Sunday morning. Then I changed the remote access credentials. Then I drove back to the city, went to work on Monday, and didn't go back. The week of the 11th came. I didn't hear from my sister until that Saturday evening. I was in a hardware store across town. When my phone rang, her name on the screen, I picked up. "What did you do to the water?" she said. No hello. She never started with hello when she was upset. "I didn't do anything to the water," I said. "The faucets aren't working. The toilets won't fill. There are 15 people here." "The well pump has a controller," I said. "It's password protected. I locked it before I left last weekend." The silence that followed had texture to it. She stopped, started again. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's my house," I said, "and I never agreed to any of this." More background noise now, voices, movement, someone asking about bottled water, then a man's voice closer to the phone. "Let me talk to him, my brother-in-law." Burke had a particular conversational style. He opened with the tone of someone who expected the problem to be easily resolved in his favor, and if that didn't work, he escalated. I had watched him do it with waiters, with contractors, with my parents once, which I hadn't forgotten. "Hey." The reasonable voice, right on schedule. "There's obviously been some miscommunication here." "There hasn't," I said. "This is pretty clear." "Okay, a beat. What do we need to do to get the water running? My parents are here. We've got kids." "You need to leave," I said. The reasonable voice left. "Excuse me? You're at my house, without my permission. I need you to leave. Your sister told us this was arranged." "My sister doesn't own my house," I said. His voice went flat. "My parents flew in for this. My brother drove 14 hours. You're going to stand on some technicality. It's not a technicality, I said. It's a house, my house, that I spent 3 years building, that nobody asked me about, before committing it to 15 people for 2 weeks. We're family, he said. That word landed funny. We've met 7 times, I said, and you've never once spoken to me about anything that wasn't going to benefit you in some way. Quiet, on his end. The water system is locked and requires credentials. I'm not going to share, I said. You can call a plumber, but there's nothing they can do with a password-protected controller. On a Saturday night, the practical option is to find somewhere else to stay. He said something about lawyers, something about unreasonable. I let him finish. Then, my sister was back on the line, her voice tight and hushed the way it got, when she was trying to contain something in front of other people. You're really going to do this, she said, not quite a question. I didn't do anything, I said. I locked my own house before I left. What happened after that isn't something I can be responsible for. People are sleeping in their cars. His mother is 68 years old. I took a breath. Laurel, you did not ask me. You told other people my house was available before you even mentioned it to me. When I said I'd think about it, you treated that like a yes you were waiting on. That's not how it works. So this is punishment. It's consequence, I said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment. In the background I could hear the sounds shifting. People figuring out logistics. Cars being started. I can't believe you're doing this, she said, finally. I can't believe you didn't ask me first, I said. Good night, Laurel. I hung up and finished shopping, and drove home. They left the next morning. I found out through my cousin, who'd heard from my parents, who'd heard from my sister. Some drove to a motel 40 minutes away. A few stayed in their cars that night. Burke's mother, from what filtered back to me, was gracious about it. Apparently, she told her son it was a lesson about assumptions. Burke's brother reportedly had extensive opinions about me that I don't need to catalog here. My sister didn't contact me for 9 days. I counted, not because I was tracking it anxiously, but because the silence was unusual enough to notice. She's a circlebacker. She and I had argued before, about small things, about the time she told our parents, something I'd asked her to keep private, about the holidays we never quite divided evenly, and she'd always come back within 48 hours. She hated leaving things unresolved. 9 days meant she was either angrier than she'd ever been, or she was sitting with something she didn't yet know how to approach. I hoped it was the second one. Anger I could handle. The second one meant she was actually thinking. I went out to the farmhouse twice during that stretch. I needed to check on things, and I also needed to be in the space. I sat on the dock both mornings. I walked the property. I fixed a loose board on the screened porch. I thought about how many Saturday mornings I'd driven out here, and what I had been building toward. And I thought about whether any of this was worth the friction. And then I thought, yes, obviously. Because the friction was never about the house. It was about whether I was a person with rights in my own life, or a resource that my sister's husband could access when it suited him. The 10th day, she called. I need to say something, she said, before I could speak. Okay, I said. I should have asked you, before I said anything to anyone. I knew that when I sent the text, and I sent it anyway, because I didn't want to have the conversation where you might say no. A pause. Burke doesn't think I owe you an apology. I think I do. I listened. Can I come out? She asked. Not to stay, just to talk, just us. Yeah, I said. Come out. She drove up on a Saturday. Alone. When she got out of her car in the gravel, she stood for a moment, looking at the house. The porch I'd built, the windows I'd replaced, the plantings along the foundation that were starting to fill in. And she had an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a while, like she was registering something she'd stopped registering a long time ago. I had coffee from the place in town. We took it out to the dock. The lake was still that morning, barely a ripple. The tree line on the far side, reflecting perfectly in the water. Neither of us said anything for a few minutes. I've always thought that the The quality of a silence tells you more about a relationship than most conversations do. I forgot what you actually did here, she said finally. I've seen the pictures. I've visited. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing it as something that cost you something and started seeing it as just a resource, a thing you had that wasn't being used. I was using it, I said. Just not in a way that was visible to anyone but me. I know. She cradled her coffee cup in both hands. Burke's parents still think we're estranged. He doesn't know what to say to them. Part of his anger is embarrassment. That's his to figure out, I said. She nodded. I let him assume that what was mine was also available to him, and then I extended that to what was yours. That was wrong. I let that sit. If you had asked me, I said eventually, I probably would have said yes to you for a weekend with reasonable notice. She looked at me. Really? Probably, with conditions. I looked out at the water. But you didn't ask. I know. She exhaled slow. I think I've been managing him for so long that I stopped noticing when I was managing other people to manage him. Like smoothing the path before he even knew there was a path to smooth. And somewhere in there, I just stopped asking permission for things I knew he'd want. I didn't say anything. There was nothing I needed to add. We sat there until the coffee was gone. A great blue heron circled the dock twice, before settling on a piling at the far end, which is something they do out here. Patient, deliberate, waiting for whatever they came for. I watched it, and thought about how many mornings I'd sat on this dock alone, and felt like that was exactly enough. When she left, she hugged me in the gravel. Long and without the formality hugs sometimes have. You're going to hold this over me, she said. Not quite an accusation. More like someone accepting a consequence they'd earned, and wanted to name it themselves first. I'm not, I said. But I'm also not going to pretend it didn't happen. She drove back down the gravel lane, and I watched until her car disappeared around the first bend. I went back inside, unlocked the well controller, reset everything to normal. Stood in the kitchen, I had rebuilt one cabinet at a time, and listened to water moving through the pipes again, which is such a quiet sound, you only notice it when it's been gone. I didn't hear from my brother-in-law. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, nothing. I didn't expect one. He was the kind of person who treated other people's firm positions as problems to be waited out. When you didn't move, eventually he moved on. I could live with that. My sister and I talked again 2 weeks later, easier this time. She mentioned she'd had a hard conversation with him about how decisions got made in their marriage. I didn't ask for details, that wasn't mine to know, and frankly, it wasn't the part I needed to see. What I needed to see was whether she'd choose honesty over convenience when it actually cost her something. She had. That was enough. Here's what I've figured out, after all of it. Some people in your life will look at what you've built and see inventory. They'll see your house and think unused square footage. They'll see your patience and think guaranteed yes. They're not always being cruel. Sometimes they've just never been asked to see it differently. Because every time they've assumed, someone absorbed it without comment. The problem is that, if you keep absorbing it, they never have to change. I didn't give a speech. I didn't send a long message explaining my feelings. I didn't have a blowout argument at the kitchen table. I just quietly removed access to something that was mine, and waited for reality to do its work. That's it. That was the whole thing. What happened after? My sister coming back. The conversation on the dock, the hug in the gravel, none of that was guaranteed. I knew it might not happen, but I also knew that if I kept swallowing it, the relationship I was protecting by staying quiet would slowly become something that wasn't worth protecting anyway. You don't have to explain to people that you're someone worth respecting. You just have to act like you believe it yourself. Eventually they'll catch up, or they won't, and either way you'll know what you're actually dealing with. I drove home that evening on the back roads, the way I had the first time I found the place. Crested the ridge where the lake appears, below you, flat and gray-silver, in the early evening light. 3 years ago I had pulled over on that road and called a stranger about a house that was falling apart. I'd been somebody with not much to show for himself yet. Driving around, looking for something he couldn't quite name. Now I had a dock, a porch I'd built from scratch, a kitchen that fit the way I wanted to cook in it, a water system that responded to me and nobody else. Some things you don't fully own until the moment you're willing to defend them. That moment changes something permanent, and you carry it different after.